Hey sewers, my name is Kimberly and today I'm coming to you from the Pattern Niche YouTube channel, formerly New Horizons Designs. Today we are working on the button tree skirt. To start off, I have printed off the pattern and I have taped it all together in sequence so that all of the lines are matching. I'm making the small tree skirt, which you will need 1 yard of your main fabric plus 1 yard of your lining fabric, as well as 3 yards of 3/4 inch double fold bias tape and 5 buttons. First, I fold my fabric in half, selvage edge to selvage edge. As you can see here, I like to put them right sides together, and then we're going to fold it the other way. And again, I just match my selvage edges. And for those that may not know, this here is your selvage edge. It's the finished edge of the weaving process. And now my fabric has 2 folds, a single fold here and a double fold here. Now when I lay out my pattern, and I've just gone ahead and traced the size that I need to make it a little bit easier. Now when I lay out my pattern, you can see it says single fold here and double fold here. So I'll match up my single fold edge on this side here, and I've also matched up the line for the double fold along my double fold line there. So as you can see here, I have pinned my pattern piece onto my fabric, and I'm going to start off by cutting the opening edge. I just traced the 6.5 inch opening edge. If you have a larger tree base, you might want to use the 10.5 opening edge. I've got a nice skinny tree, so I'm going to use the smaller one. And I'm just going to cut that edge first. Now when I said earlier that I put it on the single fold, what that meant was that there's only 1 layer showing in the fold, even though there's actually 2 layers of folded fabric there. And then here on the double fold, it's 2 folds layered together. So that's the easy way to determine which one is your single fold and which one is your double fold. Now you can see here that just for 1 layer, we need to follow this outside line. But then for all the other layers, this curved line, and then all the other layers go this circle line. So to make that work, I'm going to start it off and just snip here until where it separates. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my scissors in between the layers here so that I'm just cutting 1 layer all by itself. And I'm going to follow that outside curved line first, just with 1 layer of fabric. And then when you get to that edge, you can just go right from again, just make sure you're getting the single layer and just trim along that folded edge through 1 layer. Then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to fold this back out of the way along that other circular line. And actually, you know what? Because I've traced this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold out the layer I cut first and get it out of the way. I'm going to lay that back down. I'm just going to pin it. And now I'm going to cut the remaining layers along that inside line. And just make sure that you do that for both your outside piece and your lining piece. And because the one edge is going to be perfectly straight, I just want to true that up. And so I just put my mat underneath there. And I use my ruler to match along the straight edge of the skirt here. And I just true that straight on the non-curved side. Make sure when you cut your lining that you do it the opposite way and make the bottom layer the single layer that you cut instead of the top layer, because otherwise it won't go together right sides together with your main fabric. You can also lay it out flat like I've done here and use that to cut it out for the lining. If you are using the button and buttonhole method to close your tree skirt as a closure for your tree skirt, make sure you cut and apply interfacing to the overlap sections of your tree skirt to support the weight and the use of the buttons and buttonholes. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch right sides together, the lining and the skirt piece along this long straight edge and around the circle that goes around the base of your tree. You can see I've already started stitching this, and I'm following the 3/8 inch line on my needle plate. When I get to the corner, I'm going to judge about where the 3/8 inch line is going to be, and I'm going to put my needle down and I'm going to pivot. And that'll give us a nicely finished corner at the edge of our tree skirt. The trick with stitching curves is to keep your eye on your seam allowance right here beside the needle. Don't worry about where it's sitting here, you want to worry about where it's sitting there. And that's how you can keep it on the allowance as you go around the curve. And a reminder, never sew over your pins. And as we get around to our curved edge, this being the curved edge, we're just going to keep on going straight around the inner circle and backstitch. Now that we have stitched inside of our circle, we need to clip the seam, and the reason for that is because this circumference here, the raw cut edge, is less than the circumference in here. And when we flip this right side out, this flips with it. So it'll pull if we don't add some clips so that it lays flat. And we also want to cut diagonally across our corner here. Make sure not to clip your stitching. If you clip your stitching, go back and restitch it, otherwise you will have a hole. And then I usually clip in a little bit extra as well, just so that we don't have a ton of bulk seams in the corner there. And so to clip it, all you need to do around the circle is take the tips of your scissors and just clip the seam allowance, taking care not to go past your stitching. And that way, now when it flips, it'll sit nice and flat because it can move and separate out, as you can see here. Now before I flip it right sides out, I want to take care and note our overlap line. That's what this dashed line here is. That's so that we know how far across that's going to overlap. And the reason we're overlapping it like that is so that it makes somewhat of a cone shape and lays nicely on the pyramid version of your base of your tree. So it won't lay flat on a table, as you can see, but it will lay nicely once it's around the base of a tree. So now I'm over at my ironing board and I'm going to flip this right sides out. I usually start at the straight edge. Make sure I poke the corner out nicely. and we'll just press it. And then after we've pressed it, we'll top stitch it. To top stitch, I just changed my stitch length to a long stitch length on my machine. That's a 4. And then I'm just going to stitch as closely to the edge as I can. On my machine, I've got a little red tick on my presser foot, and that gives me a nice line to follow as I go around. And as you can see, my edge is laying nice and flat, and that's because we have clipped the seam inside. And you can see here, seam lays flat with some openings in it because we've clipped it so that that circumference can lay nice and flat. And once again, as I get to the corner, I'm gonna stitch right up to the corner to whereabouts the seam allowance is that I'm following, and pivot with my needle in to make a nice clean top stitch at the corner. And then the next part is we want to baste together the lining and the outer edge, the outer fabric of our tree skirt. So I'm actually just going to do that all in one step, and I'm going to just come up to the edge here. Once again, pivot. I'll use a bit bigger of a seam allowance for this, but less than the 3/8 of an inch. And I'm just going to use my long stitch length and stitch around the outside circumference of my tree skirt. Now to stitch the binding. You can make your own binding by cutting a strip and folding it in 4ths, or I'm going to use some pre-made purchased binding, which is already double folded. I'm going to open it all up. I'm going to match my raw edge together here. I'm going to extend the binding past about 1/2 inch. And then I'm going to follow the needle along this fold line and stitch around. You can use a long stitch for this because we're going to top stitch it again afterwards anyway, so it will stay secure. Because we are stitching the binding onto a curved edge, it's a good idea to place a few pins all around just to make sure that you've got it in place and it stays where it needs to stay. The nice thing about Baste tape is that it stretches a little bit and it shapes to what you're shaping to. So you don't need to tug and shape, you can just kind of follow your edge and it should lay nicely when we're done. So again, just stitch along that fold line. Until we've gone all of the way around our tree skirt. And don't forget, if you're liking this video, make sure you click that thumbs up and give us a like, and make sure you subscribe to keep up to date with all of our videos. And here I'm at our curved edge of our overlap, and once again I have just pinned it so that it's laying flat around. You're going to have some bunches and puckers here at this edge, that's fine, as long as this edge here is laying nice and flat with the edge of the fabric. Just take your time and take care to stitch around. Just finish off by stitching to the edge and leaving bias tape extendaways. And now what I like to do, I've left the bias tape past the edge of the finished edge of my tree skirt. And I like to just fold back that bias that we've just stitched on and trim down just a little bit the seam allowance that we've just stitched. And that ensures that when I fold it, it won't be in the way to get a nice finish. Now to get a nice finished edge on our ends of our bias, I'm going to flip that over like so, so that where I've stitched along the fold is now facing me. Then I'm going to fold this edge in and then fold it over like so. And I'm going to pin that because we're going to top stitch around the edge of the bias. So now I can just take and fold over my bias tape so that's laying nice and flat all the way around, and I can pin that, or if you're more comfortable you can just stitch it. And again, I'm just going to follow the edge of my bias tape with the little red tick on my presser foot so that I get a nice close stitching line. And I like to put a couple of back stitches in there just to keep it secure. And stitch nice and slow and careful so that you get everything laying nice and flat. And as you can see, this is the back side. My stitching catches the other folded edge to make a nice finished edge. So I'm going to just continue stitching around my tree skirt. Something to make sure of as you're stitching your bias around is that you're catching your raw edges within the folds of your bias tape. And again, if you get into the more trickier areas like this curved section of our tree skirt, you can add some pins to help ensure that your tape gets caught and lays flat. And now we're approaching the other end. Again, I've got this folded over. I'm going to fold in the end and fold over my bias tape to be stitched. And again, just a couple of back stitches to keep everything secure. So this is our tree skirt so far. As you can see, I've got my bias taped edges all nicely finished. Now I marked again my overlap lines, and then I've chosen 5 bright green buttons to decorate my tree skirt with. You can make covered buttons that will match if you were using a plain fabric, for example, with a patterned binding. Nice patterned buttons to match would be good, or you can use fancy buttons. I've chosen these plain green buttons to add on to mine. And I've also decided that I'm going to use snaps as my closure. You can actually make buttonholes for the buttons. You can actually use Velcro if you wanted to. If you're using Velcro, you should plan that ahead so that you can stitch that onto the lining side so that the stitching doesn't show on the outside. So I'll have to mark off where my buttons are going to go, and I'll stitch those on after. And to determine where my snaps are going to go, I'm going to overlap this so that it matches my mark here with the edge, the straight edge of the underside. And again down here as well. I want to get that straight edge to be right here on my marking line. And now I can mark and stitch my snaps into place along this edge to create a closure. And then after, I will stitch my buttons on as decoration. Now I have stitched my buttons on and my snaps on to keep my tree skirt together when it's around my tree. And the tree skirt is all done. My name is Kimberly, and this is the YouTube channel for Pattern Niche, formerly New Horizons Designs. And today we made the button tree skirt. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.